joining our session. I hope everyone's enjoyed our Women in Product Conference so far. I'm really thrilled to introduce you to our workshop facilitator, Miss Robyn Bolton. Robyn is the founder and the chief navigator of MileZero, an innovation consulting firm that works with medium and large companies to help them get the real results from their innovation efforts. Her clients include Nike, Hallstar, Procter & Gamble, Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, Ahold USA, and DonorsChoose.org. Prior to founding MileZero, she is a partner at Insight, which is an innovation and growth strategy consulting firm founded by Harvard professor Clayton Christensen. She was also a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, both in Boston and in Denmark. She began her career with brand management at Procter & Gamble, where she led launches of the Swiffer and the Swiffer Wetjet. Robyn also has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Her articles on innovation have appeared in publications like Fast Company, Bloomberg Business Week, and the Harvard Business Review Online. Her perspective has also been featured in the New York Times and NPR's Marketplace. Now, go ahead, take it away, Robyn.
Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And sorry if everyone's bored already, but let's get into the reason why we are all here, which is that we all want to be amazing at our jobs, and innovation is such a big part of our jobs, but it can be really hard to make space, to find time for innovation. So I am going to pull up some slides here, really just to kind of guide the conversation. And, as we go through this today, we're going to have some polls, but also want to make this as interactive as possible, even in this virtual setting. So type things into the chat, let's make this as much of a conversation as humanly possible. But let's get started and talk about what we're going to do for the next, say, 40 minutes or so. So in this workshop, we're going to talk about why success actually stifles innovation and what you can do, you personally as an individual in your role, what you can do. And then we will wrap up with some commitments. So what you will do tomorrow to start making progress on creating the space and the time and the awareness of innovation, even in small ways, kind of through your day-to-day work. So that's what we're going to do in this workshop. But first, I want to start with a couple of questions for you. So first question, and Aubrey's going to pull this up into a poll, is I'm curious, just, as you think about the company you work for or the team that you work on, how would you characterize the current state? Is it everything is awesome, everyone is happy, results are great, like things could not be better? Is it kind of steady as she goes? You have the usual ups and downs, but nothing that you can't handle. You're holding it together. Things are working, but barely. Kind of little fires everywhere. You're constantly firefighting, or you're fully engulfed in flames. Everything is broken. No one's happy. It's all a disaster. So let's take a moment for you to fill out the poll. I feel like we should have some music, Jeopardy theme or something. How's it looking, Aubrey? How are the results looking?
Okay, so far it's about 50-50 between steady as she goes. We have the usual ups and downs, but nothing we can handle, and holding it together. Things are working, but barely. But as I said that, things are working, but barely, jumped up by one vote.
All right. All right, well, I'm going to ask another question because I want to get sense for one more thing as we talk about stuff. So this question, and you can publish this poll, Aubrey, how much time do you spend on innovation? Do you spend 100% of your time? It's, 24/7, 365. Do you spend about 2.5 days a week, so about half your time on it? 20% of your time, maybe about 1 day a week, 10% of your time, kind of 4 hours a week or less, or just 0%. Like I'm just trying to operate and get work done.
Right now, we have 4 votes for 10%, 4 hours or less per week, and 1 vote for 20%, 1 day a week.
All right. Let's give folks a little bit more time to kind of put their stuff in. And there's no shame with any of these answers. Like, this is real life. There's no judgment. All right. How are we looking now?
Okay, we have 1 vote for, 1 vote for 100%, 1 vote for 50%, 1 vote for 20%, and then still 6 votes for 10%.
All right. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you for participating in this. It's just helpful to know where everyone's coming from and kind of the pressures and the environments that you're in, because the context you're in has such a huge impact on everything that you do. So, I ask these questions all the time of, folks that I work with, folks that I meet, and here's what we usually see in business. So that first question I asked you of, how are things with your team right now? You can see those options on the vertical axis. And then how much time do you spend on innovation? It's on the horizontal axis. And what I usually see is, when things are fully engulfed in flames or kind of little fires everywhere, most people aren't spending any time on innovation. And that makes sense. Like there's the day-to-day work, there is operating, there are things that just have to get done to keep the lights on, to keep things moving forward, to keep your paychecks from bouncing. And so working on something new, it's like, I just don't have time for that. Even holding it together can sometimes feel overwhelming for folks. So there's very little effort spent in innovation. But then you get to steady as she goes, like, things are good. Okay, things are good. We're going to be okay. And that's really when a lot of companies are like, yay, let's have some fun, let's innovate. And that's when you see things like hackathons get scheduled and, Shark Tanks and ideation sessions and all of those fun activities that we associate with innovation. But then something really interesting happens, that as soon as you go from, all right, like we've got things under control, to like everything is awesome, then innovation kind of stops again. And this mentality of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like everything's good, everything's going great. Nobody touch anything because it will break and then bad things will happen. So it's this very interesting dichotomy that we see in companies where you kind of hit the sweet spot where things are steady. And so there's a great appetite to innovate, but anything too great or even not great, innovation just stops. And ideally, what we would see is something like this, where you spend more, as things get better, you spend more time on innovation. So yeah, fully engulfed in flames, put those fires out. Focus on operating. But when you're fighting fires, you still should be spending the vast majority of your time focused on fighting those fires. But you can start getting curious about, what's the root cause of these issues and how can we fix them? And even that process of questioning, of getting to root cause, is part of the innovation process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. When you're holding it together, you can keep thinking, how can we improve what we're doing? Steady she goes, how can we expand into new spaces? Like, things are steady right now. Where can we grow out into? And then when everything is awesome in those few days that are few and far between, you actually can start thinking about, how do we disrupt ourselves? What does our next generation look like? So that gives you a little bit of sense of kind of, those two questions, why I ask them, and, what tends to happen in companies, and why this workshop is titled that your success is stifling innovation, because that is what we often see in companies. The great news is, and the reason I am so excited to be talking to you today, is that you can fight this. You can fight this if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. That you, because of your roles in product management, you can be the change. You can be the folks who drive people to think expansively, to innovate, to think creatively when things are good, any degree of good. And so that's what we're going to dive into, how you can do that. And basically, it's a tool, it's a way of thinking that I like to talk about, is keeping innovation on your radar. And so radar, of course, in this sense, is an acronym that stands for 5 simple things that you can do really on a daily basis that really build you and your team's innovation muscles to make innovation kind of just a way you think, a way you work. First, there's redefining innovation. Second, there's asking questions. And I already started alluding to that on some of the charts that we just saw. Discussing options, acting imperfectly, and reflecting on learnings. So I'm going to go through each one of those. And then at the end, as I go through this and finish up with stories and things like that, I'm going to ask each of you to kind of make a commitment on which one of these things you're going to do tomorrow. Don't feel like you have to do all of these. You can certainly do more than one. But what one thing are you going to do tomorrow, or kind of your next day back in the office, wherever that office may be? So let's start with redefining innovation. And innovation, as you heard, I've spent my career in it. And this is such a business buzzword that has no meaning whatsoever. Or probably more accurately, it has an infinite number of meanings, because I guarantee you, if you go into a room of 5 people and ask everyone to define innovation, you're going to get 7 different answers. And so I always like to start with, something as basic as defining the word innovation when I'm working with an innovation team, so that we're all talking the same language, and so that we actually understand each other, instead of making assumptions about what one person means and do they mean the same thing as I do. And yeah, of course they do. So the definition of innovation that I use is this: something new that creates value. Now, there's very few words, but there is a ton of meaning in this. So let me just kind of quickly go through it. So a lot of people, when you say innovation, what pops into their head is, oh my gosh, it has to be a new to the world thing, a new to the world product. Yes, and it could be other things. So those things could definitely, as I said, be a product, it could be a service, it could be software, it could be a process. I mean, agile is an innovation. Just as, decades ago, the Toyota production system was an innovation. Agile is an innovation. It could be a feature and a function on a product. It could even be a revenue model. You think of going from buying clothes to, Stitch Fix, and it's a subscription model for getting clothes. Or it could be a delivery model, going from picking something up at a store to getting it delivered to your home. That's an innovation. So innovation doesn't have to be a product. It also doesn't have to be new to the world. It could be, but it could also be new to your industry. It could be new to your company, new to your field, new to your function. Could even just be new to your team. And, depending on the magnitude of newness, there's different amounts of risk and complexity and time required and all that. But innovation, as much as people think that it's new to the world, which it can be, some of the most impactful kind of life-changing innovations are ones that are new to an industry where something is, taken from one industry, think subscriptions, you know, totally prevalent. It kind of defines like the magazine industry. But then when you bring it over into the clothing industry, that's huge, huge change. So again, something new, lots of different definitions there. The most important part of this definition is the last two words, creates value. And that's because, as I think about it, those two words are what differentiate invention from innovation. So invention is something new. What makes an invention an innovation is that it creates value. And as you can imagine, value can be defined in a lot of different ways, but really it's creating value for the customer. And in product management, in the work that we do, especially the work you do, you keep customers kind of front and center of everyone's mind. And so for something to be innovative, it has to create value for your customers and of course for your company. That value can be defined a lot of different ways. Certainly things with number signs, revenue, profit, cost, but it can also be increased loyalty, increased satisfaction, easier to use, easier to access, all different ways to create value for customers and for your companies. So that's one of the first things you can do is, Kristen, as you say, like try to get folks to align on what innovation is, or at least, start speaking the same language when they use the term innovation. And so here's a definition that you could start with, something new that creates value. All right, so with that definition ringing in our ears, I'm gonna ask again, how much time do you spend on innovation? I would sing the Jeopardy theme song, but as someone who's excused from mandatory singing class in elementary school, I will spare you all that.
Now we know we need music.
I know.
Next time.
Next time.
But results are starting to come in. We have 1 vote for 100%, 5 votes for 50%, and then 1 vote for 0%.
Awesome.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so like the votes are coming up. See, you guys you're working on innovation and you didn't even know it. And that's usually what happens. As soon as you expand that definition of innovation from like a new to the world product to all the things that it could be that create value, you realize what an impact you're having on creating something new for the business.
Now we are up to 2 votes for 100% and 5 votes for 50%.
Awesome. See, we've got a room full of innovators here. Excellent. Well, let's jump to the second letter of the acronym, which is asking questions. And I've got to tell you a story about, I ask questions all the time, but this memory sticks out the most. That I was working with one of the big US auto manufacturers several years ago, and they were developing their first hybrid vehicle. And they thought, okay, you know what? Our target customer, the first people who are going to buy this, naturally are going to be people who identify as being very firmly committed to sustainability, combating climate change, kind of green initiatives. And so we went out and we interviewed folks who self-identified as very committed to sustainability. And so I was sitting in the living room of one woman, this was in Southern California, and I'm not kidding, it was the most sustainable household I have ever seen. Like everything was reused, recycled, kind of secondhand. There's composting, like solar panels on the roof, like everything, recycled rainwater. I mean, the whole bit. It was astounding, and it was incredibly impressive. And then we walked into her garage. And in the garage was a bright yellow Humvee, which is the exact opposite of anything green or sustainable. And like kind of proudly so when you buy it in bright yellow. And so like talk about like something that just did not make sense. You know, here's someone who's so deeply and devoutly committed to the earth and to preventing climate change, and she's driving a bright yellow Humvee. And so naturally that prompted a question of like, okay, why this vehicle? And what we realized through a series of questions in an interview is that the two things that seemed so polar opposite to us were completely consistent to her, because everything was rooted in a desire to keep her kids safe. And at home, that looked like living very, very sustainably. On the roads of LA, that looked like driving around in a tank. And so she actually didn't see any disconnect. She saw total consistency. And that kind of insight you can only get from asking questions. So anytime you can, talk to people, not surveys, you know, not kind of fill out this form, answer this question, but like actually go talk to a human being, you know, and say, excuse me, or I'm sorry to bother you. You know, would you help me? You don't have to spend a long time with them. You can just, even if you bump into someone in the grocery store, excuse me, can I ask why you're buying that? You'll learn something. And definitely ask open-ended questions. You know, why are you doing that? What are you doing? How do you get that done? Or my absolute favorite, tell me more. I always use this as a follow-up question, and it is kind of like pro tip. It's great in meetings when someone asks you a question and you don't have an answer to it. You just say, huh, that's interesting. Tell me more. And they will explain and often answer their own question. So this is something you can do tomorrow, later today, kind of in any aspect of your life. Get really good at asking questions. Now, third part, discussing options. Now, it's very easy in a brainstorming session to kind of have the rule of there are no bad ideas, and you kind of open everything up so you have divergent thinking, you explore all the options, and then you hone in on one and you plow forward. But brainstorming isn't the only time you should be discussing options. You know, you certainly have to look at the project, look at what's going on, look at the timeline and the deadlines. But usually there are times that you can, throughout a project, where you can open things up and you can kind of play around a little bit. And one of the best ways to play around just a bit is with what if or how might we questions. So these are a list of some very popular kind of how might we questions. The one that I will always remember is this one of what if we take it to the extreme? And this was working with a company that focused on oral care. And they were thinking about like, how could we change the toothbrushing experience? And so like, what if we take it to the extreme? And we're like, well, what does the extreme look like? And so we went and talked to some extreme users. We talked to the zookeeper who takes care of the walrus tusks at the New York Zoo. Those are some extreme teeth. We talked to a guy who lives in Coney Island who decided to file all of his teeth into points. That is some extreme oral care. And we talked to somebody who actually had several additional, like they had extra teeth in their mouth. And, you know, when you have like 4 or 5 extra teeth beyond the average person and you are the most normal person that's getting interviewed as part of a project, you know, we're talking to some extreme users. And so, well, we knew that like, okay, most people aren't going to file their teeth into daggers. it was interesting to go to that extreme and discuss what would options for that kind of extreme case look like, because it just got us thinking differently about what a solution could look like. So while it can be hard when you're pushing against a deadline, try to carve out space to just play around with options. Ask how might we, and just see if it gets you anywhere new or interesting. And even if you end up in the same place that you started, you're starting to build that muscle of creative thinking and creative dialogue. Okay. So fourth in the RADAR acronym is to act imperfectly. And so the reason I've got a blood pressure monitor here is this was one of the more startling experiments that we ran, which was working with a healthcare company. And again, this was a long time ago. Even talking about this makes me feel old, but we were looking at, creating home blood pressure monitors that you could use with an app, your cell phone. And we're like, this makes total sense. Everybody knows what a blood pressure monitor is. And we were ready to just kind of go plowing forward, create some prototypes, launch them into test market, see what happens. And then we're going to hold up. Let's get back to kind of agile roots and create, a few prototypes and test. And so we just got some blood pressure monitors, the standard ones that your doctor slaps on your arm and pumps. And we put them in the nurse's office at the client site, and we told people to go in and take their blood pressure. And you would think no one had ever had their blood pressure taken before. People were putting the monitor kind of on their lower arm instead of their bicep. They were wrapping it around their leg, their ankle. They were putting on it so loosely that it was falling down. It was just, the majority of people could put a blood pressure cuff on correctly. And we're like, wow, if people can't even apply it correctly, that could kill this whole thing, because you can't get a good reading, if it's dangling off your arm like a bracelet. And so it completely changed the way we thought about, even testing the product, how we even thought about its viability. And that's when we realized the importance of acting imperfectly, and that imperfect action is so much more valuable than perfect inaction. Or I should say, waiting till everything's perfect to then start doing something. So I know this is very, very aligned with Agile, but it is all about, let's start with the assumptions, even assumptions that don't feel like assumptions, like people know how to put on a blood pressure cuff. Take the smallest next step and run experiments, spend a little, learn a lot. So always be thinking about kind of like, okay, what is the next smallest thing? What is the next littlest assumption we could test? Even if it's imperfect, what's the next thing we can learn about? And then the last part of RADAR is reflecting on the learnings. And, I know best practice is always to have, retros at the end of, sprint or a big piece of work. But there's also kind of, in addition to a retrospective, having a prospective. So at the beginning of a project, or at the beginning of a work stream or a piece of work, just set yourself up to learn. Talk about, what do we expect to happen? And what's our hypothesis? Where do we think we're going to end up? And what happens if we're wrong? What happens if we're right? I've also heard these called intuition sessions. And intuition is such an important skill to build in innovation. So, this is really sitting down as a team and kind of tapping into your intuition of, what do we think is going to happen? If things are going to go off the rails, where do we think they could go off the rails? And then you just set that aside. It's not about who's right, who's wrong, keeping score, anything like that. It's about tapping into your intuition. And then at the end, coming back and just saying, hey, where were we right? Where were we wrong? And that helps hone your intuition. That helps you build it as a muscle and kind of get it more accurate. And that's in addition to capturing what you've learned, kind of standard retrospective questions around what went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently, and what needs to change. So I know we kind of flew through those, as is the timeline for a workshop, but hopefully as I went through them, you heard some things that you can start doing and that you can take to your teams and kind of start building practices and muscles around that you can, with your teams, you can redefine what innovation is, or define what it is to finally get a common definition. You can build a habit around asking questions. You can build in little bits of space to discuss options, explore something to the extreme, ask how would, pick another industry do this. You can run experiments, little tiny ones. You can act imperfectly. And you can reflect on learnings and even set yourself up to kind of expect what you'll reflect on. So with that, I want to take our last poll of the day. And I want to hear from you that what is going to be on your radar tomorrow? What one of these 5 things are you going to take action on? Are you going to redefine innovation? Are you going to ask questions? Are you going to discuss options? Are you going to act imperfectly? Are you going to reflect on learnings? And then once you voted in the poll, kind of feel free to drop something in the chat. Tell us how you're going to do it.
So far, we have 50% for redefine innovation, 25% for ask questions, and 25% for acting imperfectly. But as I say that, discuss options came up too.
Excellent. Little bit of everything.
Yeah.
All right. And look at that. Way to go, Beth. Bring that definition of innovation up with engineering. I love engineers. They have their opinions on what innovation is. Oh, Claire, definitely. Building a company is all about acting imperfectly.
Oh. Carly just sent a message.
I love that. Say, why don't we give something a try, because we have a few minutes. Carly, we're going to see if we can kind of bring you on stage. And you can tell us a little bit about, your leadership team offsite and kind of what you're thinking. There we go.
Hello, I'm on the spot.
Hello.
Luckily, I look ready for camera today.
You are very camera ready. Way to go.
Gorgeous.
So yeah, tell us about your offsite.
Yeah, now that our COVID restrictions are lifting, we're planning our first in-person offsite in 2 years. And we have a new team that's come together in kind of the last few months. And one of the things, part of the reason I'm in this session today, in our team engagement survey, is our innovation scores are not where we want them to be. And I just had this aha moment, Robyn, when you were defining innovation. I realized I was like, I don't even know how our leadership team defines innovation. I don't know how our team defines it. When they respond to that survey, like what's in the back of their mind? Do we even have that common language? So that was the big aha for me, and I want to see how we can bring that into that offsite.
That's great. And it's amazing, because it's one of those things that you're like, oh, we're all saying the same word. So we meet something, but like you said, like, wait, trust me, like everyone has a different definition, and just getting alignment around, whatever it's going to mean for you and the leadership team and your team, like just getting alignment on whatever that is can be so freeing.
I think so. Especially I think about our team. Some of them in the past had worked on more of those, here's that new feature, right? Or it'd be like that new to the world. This is like the new projects feature that never existed. It was really easy to understand and encapsulate. And now a lot of our team is more of like a growth team, right? And so it's more about how are you looking at different business models? How are you looking at different ways of onboarding people? How are you looking at different ways of packaging things? And so I really think that could be some of it of what innovation looked like for this team a year ago could be really different than for those same humans, what it looks like now.
Yeah, definitely. And making sure that people don't feel like, because what can happen, especially with an amazing shift like the one you just described, is some people can feel left behind, like, well, I'm working on a new feature and function, but nobody cares anymore. And, so what could first define innovation broadly, but then you can even say, like, hey, you know what? There are different types of innovation and they're all important.
I love that.
And so, like, working on a process innovation is just as important as a feature and function, which is just as important as a new business model, because they're all going to create value at different times. And we need value all the time.
I like that. And so one question that prompts for me, Robyn, is, as you work about bringing together that common definition, how do you make that a two-way dialogue, right? Because me putting a slide up there and saying, here's innovation doesn't mean that everyone's going to walk out of that offsite with that same definition. So what would you suggest? What's a way that I could engage people in that process?
Yeah, I always like to start by asking each person to give me their definition of innovation. And, if you have a big group, maybe you can solicit that beforehand, and then you can put up a list of like, hey, here's all the different definitions we have. Here are the common themes or something like that. If you have a small group, you can actually kind of do it real time of here's a Post-it, write down your definition of innovation, slap it up there, and let's work through this together.
I love that. And that would also kind of help us understand that instinct I have of maybe we mean different things. I'd be able to see that really quickly, right, with all those answers.
Yeah, exactly. And, that may also lead to you be like, hey, we have kind of 3 buckets. So maybe we need to have 3 types of innovation. And what are we going to call them?
Oh, I love that. So getting a click down of and even especially us, if we were clear as a leadership team, what's the innovation that we care about or that's tied to our strategy to be able to drive those links for our team so that they know when they're bringing that innovation into their work where they should be focusing the energy.
Yep, totally.
Cool.
Well, I hope things go well. I would love to hear how it goes. So definitely, let's make sure we stay in touch.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. So anyone else? Let's see. Kristen, you said if I can call on you, you don't have to respond. You can be, I'm good. But since you work on an innovation team, I'm curious kind of how you keep innovation alive and well on a daily basis.
I'm happy to respond to my animals or just getting dinner right now. So if there's dogs and cats in the background, apologies. But so I'm on an innovation team now. It's honestly, it's a fairly new team. We've just been stood up in the past few months. So I think we're still kind of working through, some of this stuff. I know I kind of called out the definition of innovation before, where it's something I think similar to Carly, where we've heard like a lot of people have a lot of different ideas of, is innovation something new to the company? Because there's still a lot of things where we feel like, we could really kind of get up to parity and we're maybe not quite there yet. So is it just new to the company? Is it new to the industry? Is it new to the world? And so there's still a little bit of disagreement there. So I really liked kind of just doing a workshop and trying to get everyone's read on that. As far as how we're trying as a team to kind of keep that alive, I think the big thing for us is I really like that you called out kind of the next smallest step that you can take. I think sometimes, we're in such a greenfield space where like the it's uncharted territory for us as a company, and it's just so broad of a space that we're being asked to cover. It's very easy to kind of go off and look at the next shiniest thing and try to figure out, okay, now like what do we do with this? So I think just being able to kind of keep that, we just need to kind of improve one little thing at a time, and that gives us the flexibility to pivot and change directions if we need to. So that really resonated, and it's something I think that, you know, leaving here today and kind of working with my team is just something for us to double down on.
Yeah, because I totally hear you. It can feel, the more green space and open, like, choice is overwhelming. You're like, oh my gosh, like I have to eat an elephant in one bite. And it's like, no, just kind of take that one step in front of the other, make sure that you're working on something that's aligned with the strategy, because that's what management cares about, and get those small wins in.
And I love that you called out to like the intuition piece of it. I think that's something, I'm not sure if like others are struggling with this too, of like what's the right level of intuition there, because some of this is so big and open and new, and at the same time, you know, kind of making sure that especially stakeholders stay grounded in the, what do we know about users, what do we know about this space, what do the research and the assumptions, and once we do that small step and we learn something, how do we do that retro or share that learning so that people are along for that ride?
Yeah, along for the ride. So key. I see so many teams, innovation teams, go off and like, we'll come back with the amazing thing, and that silence is just deadly. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. Oh, and I realized that we're at time. So enjoy your dinner, Kristen. And thank you, everybody, for coming to this workshop. Hope that you got something out of it, that you are going to be able to go back to your teams and make innovation part of your daily work. All of the slides that I went through, and kind of a handy little one pager, if you scroll down on your, you know, the side of this where you can see Aubrey and I on video, you can see the worksheet and the slides. You can download that, share them with your teams. My contact information is on there. And I just love to continue to hear how you're making innovation kind of come to life every single day. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, thank you for joining. And I added our LinkedIn and Twitter information in the
Thank
chat
you,
if
Aubrey.
you'd like to find us and connect. We'd love that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.